Hello and welcome to Build It. Now if you've watched my channel before, you know this isn't the type of video I normally make. However, I've been working on this technique to neaten my 3D prints for quite a while now, and I want to show you guys quickly how I was able to get such a neat print out of such a shitty printer. Now, you may remember in a previous video we got a sponsorship from GearBest, which was a $130 3D printer. Now, I'm still super grateful for that 3D printer, but it's definitely a fact that it doesn't output the greatest prints around. So in this video, I'm going to show you my techniques for getting some really nice looking prints out of that shitty printer. Now, I know there are tons of videos on YouTube on how to get good looking 3D prints. This is just my own personal interpretation, so it may or may not work for you. Okay, so the first thing I do in my 3D printing software is make sure I set the print quality to be really high. Now this may seem really obvious, but my printer especially is really bad at this. You can see even on really high printer quality at a really low speed over a really long time, it still outputs some pretty bad prints. For example, we can see here on this print that there's quite a bit of visible lines, and even if you rub your finger across it, you can really feel those lines on there, which doesn't feel like a very professional product, and it really annoys me when I use it. So to get rid of this, we're going to be implementing what I think is a really good way of getting rid of these lines and making a really neat 3D print. So we're going to start off by actually giving the 3D print a brim. Now what this does is it's this kind of like thin layer of plastic that goes around the 3D print when it's printing, which helps adhere it to the print base. Now when it's finished printing, you can really just put it off like that with your hands. It may leave a little bit of plastic around the edges, but that can be filed off really easily with a knife or sandpaper or whatever, really. Now, once that's off, you should be left with a really straight 3D print. Now you'll find sometimes that the 3D printer actually, if it doesn't have a brim and it doesn't have good bed adhesion, that the print will actually go wobbly on the side and will have like a little bit of a side up. Here, there's an example of this here. Here's an example of that. You can see this print did not have any bed adhesion, and because of that, when it printed, it had this little bit of a lip in the front, which is definitely not meant to be there. That's meant to be 100% straight. So, giving it that bed adhesion and giving it the brim really does help keep it straight. So this is our first step in the 3D printing process. Now, the second step then would be to try and get rid of those lines and those indents, since we can feel them and we can see them. Now, the easiest way to do this is just to grab some sandpaper and sand it down. Now, normally when I do this, I start off on a really low grit sandpaper. For example, here's this 220 grit sandpaper, which is really rough and does wear down the 3D prints really quick. So, after not even about 5 seconds of sanding, you can see it's already starting to get a lot smoother, but a little bit rougher as well. So, after I finish with the 220 grit, I move on to something a little bit higher, maybe like 500 grits, and then eventually I finish off with 600 grit, which leaves it with a really fine, smooth finish. However, in the case of this example, we can see that the lines are really deep in the 3D print. So if I kept sanding and kept sanding, eventually I would sand so much that the print would be too weak to use. So what I like to use to fill in the cracks is this clear coat for nail polish. Now what this does is you kind of put it on your nails after you've painted them, and it adds this kind of clear protective layer made of like a pretty hard plastic, I think. Now, this is great because we can kind of layer it onto our 3D print, and then we should end up with this very smooth looking 3D print. Now, unfortunately, if we take a look at it, we'll see that even though it feels very smooth to touch, we can still see those lines there. See, we can see the cracks everywhere there. And because it doesn't spray on, it's more of a kind of a paint on, there's a little bit of roughness and a little bit of unevenness in the actual clear coat. Now to get rid of this unevenness and to make it look a little bit nicer, we're going to take some very high grit sandpaper, maybe 600 grit, and sand it for about a minute or two, which will kind of make the top coat a little bit more rough, and it will kind of give it like a matte finish. However, we can still see those indents through the clear coat because it's clear. Now to get rid of this, we're going to implement our final step, which is of course spray painting it. Now because we sanded it quite a lot, it makes it a lot easier for the spray paint to stick to it, making your life a little bit easier. So I spray painted this final one with a matte black finish, and you can see that the lines are completely gone. It feels super smooth to the touch. I would recommend doing maybe 2 coats just in case there's a little bit of cracks, and the spray paint will help fill that in. And if there's still a little bit of cracks after you're finished, you can just add a clear coat, which will also protect the paint. And just like that, we've gone from this really rough, kind of terrible looking 3D print to this really nice, smooth, matte black finish. I hope that was helpful for someone. I don't expect to see many videos like this in the future. I was just kind of excited to show off my technique for getting a 3D print to look really nice. Expect to see this in an up-and-coming video involving the Atari 2600 and an Arduino, but more on that later. And thanks for watching. See you in the next one.